The lights in the academy classroom buzzed with a soft blue hum, and every eye in the room was already on me before I even sat down. My name is Kira Voss. I am 17 years old, and I am, according to the records of the Coalition Youth Academy, the only human being currently enrolled anywhere among the stars. I did not choose this. My planet did not choose this either. Kesserine 4 was picked by a committee I never met, for a program I never asked to join, because someone far above my pay grade decided it would look good to have a girl from a Deathworld sitting in a classroom full of polished, comfortable, safe alien teenagers. I walked to my seat, and the whispering started immediately. "That is the one from the Forbidden Planet," a voice murmured somewhere to my left. "I heard nothing lives there longer than a few years," another voice added, not even bothering to lower the volume. I did not turn around. I had learned, in my first 3 days here, that turning around only encouraged them. The room itself was beautiful, in a strange, sterile way. The walls curved gently upward into a domed ceiling that showed a projection of calm violet skies, the kind of sky no one on Kesserine 4 had ever been foolish enough to trust. Soft chairs, soft light, soft air that smelled of nothing at all. Everything about this place had been built for comfort, and comfort was a word I was still learning the meaning of. Then Threll Vaxo Dunn walked in. He moved the way people move when they have never once been told no. Silver skin, tall frame, dressed in fabric that probably cost more than every building on my home continent combined. He was from a world the registry called a garden world, a place so gentle that its biggest danger, as far as I could tell, was boredom. He saw me before he even reached his seat, and his face lit up with the kind of smile that promised trouble. "Well, look who decided to grace us again," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "the little survivor from the dead planet." A few students laughed, not all of them. But enough. I kept my eyes on the datapad in front of me and said nothing. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Threll dropped into the seat directly across from mine, propped his feet up like he owned the furniture, and pulled up something on his own datapad. He turned the screen toward me so I could see it clearly. It was my planet's registry file, Kesserine 4, classification, Deathworld, gravity, 2.3 standard, atmosphere, breathable, with recurring toxic pollen events. Native megafauna, extensive, hostile, largely undocumented. Sapient life, human, isolated colony, survival status unconfirmed for extended periods. He read the last line aloud, slowly, savoring it. "Survival status unconfirmed," he repeated, grinning at me. "That is almost poetic. Your whole planet is basically a shrug from the people who are supposed to know things." More laughter now, louder. I looked up at him for the first time. "You should be careful what you laugh at," I said quietly. "Some things sound funny, right up until they are not." He tilted his head, delighted that I had finally responded. "Oh, she speaks. I was starting to think the pressure down there had squashed your vocal cords along with your future." I felt something settle inside me, cold and steady, the way it always did, right before I needed to make a decision that mattered. "I am only going to say this once," I told him, and my voice did not shake at all. "You do not know what that word means. Uninhabitable. You have never had to know. I have lived it every single day of my life. So laugh if you want, but do not ask me to explain it to you twice." For half a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Maybe it was surprise, maybe it was the tiniest thread of doubt. Then he laughed anyway, tossing his head back like I had just told the funniest joke he had heard all cycle. Threatening me now? On my own campus? In front of my own class? He looked around at the others, gathering their attention like a performer gathering applause. "This is wonderful. The Deathworld girl thinks she can scare a Vaxo Dunn." I said nothing else. I had made my warning. What he did with it was his choice, not mine. The instructor arrived a moment later, a tall being named Vay Kaloran, with pale green skin and 4 calm eyes, and the class shifted its attention forward, though I could still feel Threll's gaze on me, amused and unbothered, like I was an interesting insect he had decided to keep for entertainment. The lesson that day was on cultural exchange, a subject the Academy loved to repeat endlessly, as if saying the words often enough would make anyone actually mean them. Instructor Caloran spoke about cooperation between worlds, about respect, about learning from every form of life the galaxy had to offer. Threll raised his hand halfway through, his eyes flicking toward me with obvious intent. "Instructor, if we are meant to learn from every form of life," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness, "does that include worlds that are barely capable of supporting life at all? Or is there a line somewhere?" A ripple of laughter moved through the room again. Instructor Caloran's 4 eyes blinked slowly, clearly uncomfortable, but not quite willing to shut the question down entirely. "All perspectives have value, Threll," the instructor said carefully. "Even from a world that could not even manage to build proper cities," Threll pressed, glancing my way. I looked at the images. Everything there looks like it is trying to survive, not actually live. I kept my face still. I had spent years learning how to keep my face still, because on Kesserine 4, showing fear at the wrong moment could cost you far more than an argument in a classroom. "There is a difference," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the room, "between a world that is soft and a world that is strong. You have never had to build anything that could survive a single night where I come from." Threll's smile widened, but I saw the small twitch at the corner of his mouth, the one that told me the comment had actually landed somewhere. "Big words," he said, "from someone whose planet has not even earned a proper name on most star charts. Just a number, Kesserine 4, not even worth remembering." The class laughed harder this time, and I let them. I had already given my one warning. I do not repeat myself. I have never needed to, because eventually, the people who mock what they do not understand always find out exactly why they should not have. After class, I walked alone through the wide, gleaming corridors of the Academy, past students who stared at me like I was something rare in a display case rather than a person. A girl named Grace Ellery, one of the few students who had actually bothered to speak to me kindly since I arrived, caught up beside me, her expression worried. "You should not let him get to you like that," Grace said. "Threll does this to everyone eventually. He just enjoys it more with you because you do not react the way he wants." "I am not upset," I told her honestly. "I am just tired of explaining something that should not need explaining." Grace hesitated. "What do you mean?" I looked at her, and for a moment I considered saying nothing at all, the way I usually did, but something in her face was genuinely curious, not mocking, so I let a little bit of the truth through. "On my planet," I said slowly, "the ground itself is heavier than anything most people here have ever felt. The air carries poison in it during certain seasons, and we have learned to read the sky the way people here read a datapad. There are creatures larger than these buildings that hunt using heat and movement, and children are taught to disappear before they are taught to read. It is not a dead world," I continued. "It is a world that never stopped testing us, and the ones who survived it did not survive by being strong in the way people usually mean strong. We survived by becoming very, very good at not being found." Grace's eyes widened slightly. "That sounds terrifying." "It is," I admitted. "But it also made us something most people here cannot understand. Threll thinks weakness looks like silence. He has no idea that silence, where I come from, is the loudest kind of strength there is." We reached the split in the corridor where our paths separated, and Grace lingered a moment longer. "Be careful," she said. "Threll does not like losing arguments. If he feels embarrassed, he tends to escalate things instead of letting them go." I gave her a small, calm smile. "I already warned him once, Grace. That is more than most people ever get from me." She looked like she wanted to ask what that meant, but she did not push further, and I did not explain. That evening, alone in my small assigned quarters, I sat by the narrow viewport and watched the artificial stars of the Academy's orbit drift lazily past, so different from the wild, unpredictable sky of home. I thought about Threll's laughter, about the way the entire room had joined in without a second thought, about how easy it was for people who had never once been afraid for their lives to mock those of us who had. I was not angry. Anger was a wasteful emotion, one I had learned to set aside a long time ago, because anger made noise, and noise got you noticed by the wrong things at the wrong time. What I felt instead was something quieter, something far more patient. I felt certain. Somewhere out there, in his soft, comfortable world, Threll Vaxo-Dunn had no idea what kind of mistake he had just made. He thought this was over. He thought a single classroom laugh was the end of the matter. But I had told him the truth, plainly and clearly, and he had chosen to ignore it. I only ever give one warning. Everything that happened after this point would be entirely his own doing. The next few days passed in a strange kind of quiet, the kind that always feels like the pause before something breaks. Threll did not bring up my planet again in class, and for a short while I actually believed he might have let the matter rest. I should have known better. Boys like Threll do not let things rest. They wait, they plan, and they look for a stage bigger than a simple classroom to make their point. He found one on the 5th day. The Academy held a weekly gathering called Open Forum, where students from every world could propose activities, debates, or demonstrations in front of the entire student body. It was meant to encourage cooperation and understanding between different species. In practice, it mostly became a place where the loudest and most confident students performed for everyone else. I was sitting near the back of the wide amphitheater, half listening to a presentation about crystal formations on some ice moon, when Threll stood up from his seat several rows ahead and raised his hand for the floor. "I have a proposal," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the domed chamber. "Something educational. Something that will really help all of us understand what makes certain worlds so special." Instructor Kaloran, standing near the front, nodded cautiously. "Go ahead, Threll." He turned, and I felt the weight of his gaze land directly on me. "There has been a lot of talk," he said, "about how tough life is supposed to be on Deathworlds. About how the people who live there are somehow stronger, sharper, better prepared than the rest of us soft, comfortable folks from safer planets." A few students chuckled. Some glanced my way. "So I propose a trial," Threll continued, clearly enjoying himself now. "The Academy has a cultural simulation chamber. I say we calibrate it, not to some impossible Deathworld nightmare, but to something reasonable. My own homeworld, for example. Mild atmosphere, comfortable gravity, a light haze during certain seasons, nothing anyone here would call dangerous." He smiled at me, slow and deliberate. "Let us see how well our resident survivor handles a simple, gentle environment. If Deathworld living really does make someone tougher, this should be nothing at all. A walk through a garden." The room buzzed immediately with excited murmuring. This was exactly the kind of spectacle students loved, a chance to watch someone either prove themselves or fail spectacularly in front of everyone. Instructor Kaloran's 4 eyes blinked with visible hesitation. "Threll, this is meant to be an educational exercise, not a challenge between students." "It is educational," Threll said smoothly. "We will all learn something valuable, one way or another." Every head in the amphitheater turned toward me, waiting. I understood exactly what he was doing. He was not trying to test me against genuine danger. He was trying to trap me in a situation designed entirely around his comfort, a place built for his body, his lungs, his senses, hoping that outside the extreme conditions of my own world, I would suddenly become as fragile and lost as everyone here assumed. He wanted an audience for my failure. I stood up slowly, and the entire room fell quiet, waiting to see how I would respond. "You want to test me in a simulation of your world," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Fine, I accept." A wave of surprised murmurs rippled through the crowd. Threll's grin widened, delighted that I had walked so easily into what he clearly believed was his trap. "Wonderful," he said. Then it is settled. Tomorrow, after classes, the whole academy can watch. I looked at him directly, and for just a moment, I let a little of the calm certainty I felt show clearly on my face. "One more thing," I said. "Once that chamber seals, there is no stopping the trial early. If you start this, you finish it. Are you certain that is what you want?" Threll laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "It is my own homeworld's environment, Kira. I could survive it blindfolded. The real question is whether you can survive it at all." "That is not what I asked," I said quietly. "I asked if you were certain." Something in my tone made a few students shift uncomfortably in their seats, though Threll himself barely seemed to notice. He was too caught up in the anticipation of his own victory to hear the warning underneath my words. "I am certain," he said simply. "Tomorrow, everyone will finally see the truth about your precious Deathworld toughness." I sat back down without another word, while the amphitheater buzzed with excitement around me. Grace, sitting a few rows over, caught my eye with an expression somewhere between worry and disbelief. That night, alone again in my quarters, I did not feel nervous. I ran through calculations instead, the way I always did before anything important. Threll's homeworld environment would include a lighter gravity than even the Academy's usual settings, a thinner atmosphere with more oxygen, moderate temperatures, and a fine haze of pollen-like particles during certain simulated seasons. To him, and to almost everyone watching, this would look like a mild, unremarkable environment, barely worth calling a challenge at all. To me, it was almost laughably gentle. I had grown up sprinting across broken ground under gravity more than twice this strength, breathing air thick with real toxins that could damage lungs within minutes if you did not know how to control your breathing, hiding from creatures that could sense heat and movement from impossible distances. My body had been shaped, quite literally, by an environment that punished every mistake without mercy. Threll's world, by comparison, was practically a resting chamber. But that was not truly what worried me, because I was not worried at all. What actually mattered was something far more subtle, something Threll and the rest of the Academy did not understand yet. On Kesserine 4, surviving was never only about strength, it was about becoming invisible. My people had spent generations learning to move so quietly, so carefully, that predators far larger and far more dangerous than any simulation chamber creature would pass within meters of us and never even realize we were there. If Threll wanted a demonstration of Deathworld toughness, I intended to give him something far more interesting than simply standing still and breathing through some light haze. I intended to show him exactly what it meant to disappear. The following day arrived far too quickly for most of the nervous students around me, though for me, time seemed to move with unusual clarity, the way it always did before something important. The simulation chamber sat at the center of the Academy's largest demonstration hall, a wide cylindrical structure made of reinforced transparent paneling, tall enough to hold a small forest of holographic trees and thick enough to safely contain almost any environment the Academy wished to recreate. By the time classes ended, nearly every student on campus had gathered around the viewing gallery that circled the chamber, eager to watch the spectacle Threll had promised them. Threll stood near the control podium, dressed in clothing clearly chosen for the occasion, practically glowing with confidence as he addressed the crowd. "Today," he announced, his voice amplified across the hall, "we are going to settle a simple question. Is a Deathworld survivor really as tough as everyone claims, or is all of that reputation simply exaggeration built on fear of the unknown?" The crowd cheered and murmured excitedly. I walked calmly toward the chamber entrance, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed every step. Grace appeared briefly at my side, her voice low and urgent. "You do not have to do this, Kira. You could still walk away." "I already gave him a warning," I said simply. "This is his choice now, not mine." She looked like she wanted to argue further, but Instructor Kaloran called the students to their places, and there was no more time for conversation. I stepped through the entrance into the chamber, the thick door sliding shut behind me with a heavy, final sound. Threll entered from the opposite side a moment later, his usual confident smile firmly in place. "Nervous yet?" he asked, glancing at me as the internal systems began their slow calibration. "No," I said honestly. He laughed softly, clearly assuming this was simple bravado. Around us, the chamber lights dimmed slightly, replaced by a soft, warm glow meant to simulate his homeworld's gentle sunlight. Holographic trees flickered into existence, tall and graceful, swaying slightly as artificial wind moved through the space. The air itself began to shift, growing thinner, lighter, carrying the faint mineral scent of an unfamiliar world. It was, exactly as promised, mild, comfortable, safe. For him. I felt my own body adjust instinctively, the way it always did in unfamiliar environments. Senses sharpening, breathing slowing, muscles settling into that familiar readiness I had carried with me since childhood. Threll watched me carefully, clearly expecting some visible sign of struggle, some stumble or gasp that would prove his point in front of the gathered crowd. Instead, I simply stood still, breathing steadily, watching him with calm, patient eyes. "See," he said loudly, turning slightly toward the viewing gallery outside. "She is already struggling to adjust. Give it a few minutes, and you will all see exactly what I mean." I said nothing. I had learned long ago that words rarely convinced people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. Actions were far more effective. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, signaling the beginning of the simulated seasonal haze Threll had specifically requested, the light mist meant to represent his own homeworld's mildest natural challenge. Thin, pale vapor began drifting gently from hidden vents along the chamber walls, curling slowly around the holographic trees, thickening gradually until visibility began to soften at the edges. Threll glanced toward it with mild interest. "This is nothing," he said confidently, mostly for the benefit of the crowd watching through the transparent walls. "A light breeze back home, nothing dangerous at all." I watched the mist thicken slowly around us, and felt that same familiar stillness settle deep inside my chest, the one my mother had taught me to find as a very young child, long before I had learned to walk properly across broken, dangerous ground. "Last chance to walk this back, Threll," I said quietly, my voice calm and even. He turned toward me, grinning, clearly amused by what he still believed was empty bravado. "Walk what back?" he asked, spreading his arms wide as the haze continued curling gently around him. "This is my world, Kira. I could not be more comfortable." I looked at him steadily, feeling the mist grow thicker around us, blurring the edges of the holographic trees, softening the outline of his silver skin. "I am not talking about the mist," I said. Before he could ask what I meant, I let my breathing slow further, my muscles relax into that old familiar readiness, and I stepped sideways into the thickening haze. Threll blew a mocking kiss in my direction, clearly assuming I was simply retreating in discomfort. He had no idea what was actually about to happen. The mist swallowed the edges of the world around me, and I let it. Most people, when surrounded by fog or haze, instinctively tense up. Their breathing quickens, their eyes strain to see further than they can, their bodies prepare to run from something they cannot even identify. That instinct makes sense on a gentle world, where fog is rare and unfamiliar. On Kesserine 4, we grew up inside pollen storms thicker than this simulation could ever hope to recreate. Storms that could blind a careless traveler within seconds and strip the air of everything except poison and static. We did not learn to fear the mist. We learned to become part of it. I slowed my breathing until it barely stirred the air in front of my face. I softened my footsteps until they made no sound against the chamber floor. I let my body settle into that old, practiced stillness, the one that made predators 3 times my size walk right past me without ever noticing I was there. Around me, Threll's voice rang out again, still confident, still amused. "Kira, where did you scurry off to? Do not tell me a little bit of fog is already too much for you." I did not answer. Silence, at this moment, was far more powerful than any response I could give. I moved sideways through the thickening haze, careful and deliberate, circling slowly around the edge of the holographic trees. The simulation sensors, I already understood from studying the chamber specifications the night before, were designed to track heat signatures and sudden movements, the kind of detection systems useful for measuring a student's reactions during a calm, controlled exercise. They were never designed to track someone who had spent their entire life learning to hide from creatures that hunted using exactly those methods. I lowered my body temperature signature the way my mother had taught me, breathing slowly through controlled patterns that kept my exhaled warmth from spreading outward too quickly. I moved with tiny, careful steps, distributing my weight evenly, avoiding anything that might create a sudden thermal spike or vibration the sensors could easily catch. Within moments, I had effectively vanished, not through any impossible trick or hidden technology, but through simple, practiced skill built from years of genuine necessity. Outside the chamber, in the viewing gallery, I could hear the murmur of the crowd shifting from excited anticipation into something closer to confusion. "Where did she go?" someone asked loudly enough for the sound to carry through the chamber's speaker system. "She was just there a moment ago," another voice added, tinged with the first traces of concern. Inside the chamber, Threll turned in a slow circle, his earlier smugness faltering slightly, as the mist continued curling thickly around him, hiding everything beyond a few careful steps in any direction. "This is not funny," he called out, his voice carrying just a hint of uncertainty now. "Come out from wherever you are hiding. You are only embarrassing yourself further." I said nothing, moving instead in a slow, careful arc around him, staying just beyond the edge of his vision, using the holographic trees and the thickening haze exactly the way I had once used real fog and real vegetation back home to move unseen past creatures that could have ended my life in a single moment. The chamber's internal sensors, built to measure comfortable, controlled reactions rather than genuine survival techniques, struggled visibly on the overhead display screens outside. I could hear Instructor Calloran's voice now, tight with concern, speaking rapidly to someone near the control podium. "The tracking system shows only a partial signature," the instructor said. "I am not detecting a clear location for either student." "That should not be possible," another voice replied, one of the Academy's technical staff. "The chamber sensors are calibrated for precise tracking, unless something is actively interfering with them." I was not interfering with anything mechanical. I was simply doing what my body had been trained to do since before I could properly speak, moving in ways that made me difficult for any system built around the assumption of comfortable, careless movement to properly register. Inside the chamber, Threll's voice rose in volume, and for the first time, I heard something beneath his usual arrogance. "Kira," he called out, turning again, his silver skin barely visible now through the thickening haze. "This is not amusing anymore." "Where are you?" I moved closer, silent and deliberate, watching him from just beyond the edge of clear visibility. His shoulders had tensed. His breathing, which had been slow and confident only minutes earlier, had grown noticeably quicker. He was frightened now, though he clearly did not want to admit it, not with an entire audience watching from outside the chamber walls. "This is a simple environment," he muttered, mostly to himself, though I could hear every word clearly. "My own homeworld. There is nothing here that could actually hurt anyone." He was right about that, in a way. There was nothing in that chamber capable of causing him any genuine harm, but fear, I had learned long ago, rarely needed a real threat to take hold. Sometimes all it needed was uncertainty, the simple, unsettling feeling of not knowing where danger might be standing, even when no danger actually existed at all. I let him feel that uncertainty a little longer. Outside the chamber, the crowd's murmuring had grown louder, edged now with genuine alarm rather than simple curiosity. "Someone stop the simulation," Grace's voice called out clearly, cutting through the noise. "This has gone too far." "The chamber cannot be interrupted mid-trial," Instructor Calloran replied, tension clear in every word. Not without risking a dangerous pressure imbalance for whoever remains inside. I understood then that stopping this now, even if the Academy staff wanted to, was not a simple option. Threll had insisted, back in the amphitheater, that once the chamber sealed, the trial had to run its course. His own rule, now working firmly against him. Inside the haze, Threll spun in another slow circle, his earlier confidence completely gone now, replaced by something raw and uncertain. "Kira!" he called out again, and his voice cracked slightly on my name, the first real crack in the polished, arrogant mask he had worn since the very first day I arrived at this academy. "Where are you? Say something. Anything." I stepped closer still, close enough now that I could have reached out and touched his shoulder if I wanted to. He had no idea I was standing directly behind him, hidden perfectly within the thick, curling mist. I thought for a moment about my mother's voice, calm and steady, teaching me this exact lesson many years ago during a real pollen storm back home, with something enormous and hungry moving somewhere close by in the darkness. "Fear is loud," she had told me then, her hand gentle on my shoulder as she guided my breathing into slow, careful patterns. "But stillness is louder, if you know how to use it properly. The world will always try to convince you that survival means being seen, being strong, being the loudest thing in the room. It does not. Survival means understanding exactly when to disappear." I had understood that lesson then, as a frightened child hiding from something far larger than myself. I understood it even more clearly now, standing calmly behind a boy who had spent days mocking a world he had never once had to survive. Threll's breathing had grown ragged now, his earlier laughter completely forgotten. He reached out one hand, sweeping it uselessly through the thick haze in front of him, searching for something, anything, that might tell him where I had gone. "This is not real danger," he muttered again, though his voice trembled slightly with every word. "This is my own homeworld's environment. There is nothing here." "You are right," I said quietly, my voice calm and steady, right beside his ear. He jumped visibly, spinning around so quickly he nearly lost his footing entirely, his eyes wide with genuine shock as he finally saw me standing directly in front of him, close enough to touch, having been there the entire time without him noticing at all. "How?" he stammered, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "How did you do that? I was watching, I was listening, there was nowhere for you to hide in here." I looked at him steadily, feeling none of the anger or satisfaction I might have expected to feel in this moment. Instead, I felt something quieter, something closer to simple, patient understanding. "There does not need to be anywhere to hide," I said, "when you know how to become something no one is looking for." Outside the chamber walls, I could hear the crowd's murmuring shift dramatically, confusion turning rapidly into astonishment as the viewing screens finally caught a clear image of both of us standing together within the thinning mist. "She was right there the entire time," someone said loudly, disbelief clear in their voice. "How did none of the sensors detect her properly?" Instructor Calloran's voice, usually so calm and measured, carried a note of genuine amazement now. "I have never seen tracking data like this before. It is almost as though her signature simply refused to register at all." Threll stared at me, his silver skin slightly paler than usual, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be found. For the first time since I had arrived at this academy, he looked at me, not with mockery or amusement, but with something closer to genuine, uncertain respect. "You could have done that from the very beginning," he said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn clearly on his face. "You let me believe you were struggling." "I let you believe what you already wanted to believe," I said simply. "That was never difficult. You had already decided who I was, before I ever said a single word to you." The mist continued thinning slowly around us as the chamber's simulation cycle approached its natural end, the holographic trees flickering gently as the artificial environment began winding down toward its final stage. Threll said nothing further, though I could see the wheels turning clearly behind his eyes, processing something he had never once considered possible. Outside, the crowd had grown almost completely silent now, watching intently as the haze cleared fully, revealing the two of us standing calmly in the center of the chamber, the trial technically still ongoing, though its true purpose had already shifted entirely. I looked at Threll steadily, my voice calm and even. "You wanted to know if a death world really makes someone tougher than a gentle world like yours," I said. "But toughness was never really the question, was it? The real question was whether you were prepared to learn something you did not already believe." He did not answer immediately. For the first time since I had met him, Threll Vaxo Dunn seemed to have run out of clever, mocking words entirely. While the chamber's mist continued clearing around us, my mind drifted briefly, unbidden, back to a memory I had carried with me since I was very young, one that had shaped nearly everything about who I had become. I was 6 years old, crouched low in a shallow ditch beside my mother, while a real pollen storm rolled slowly across the valley below our settlement. The sky above Kesserine 4 during storm season turned a strange, sickly yellow, thick with fine particles that could damage lungs within minutes if breathed carelessly, and somewhere close by, hidden within that thick haze, something large enough to shake the ground with each step was moving steadily closer. "Do not move," my mother had whispered, her hand pressed gently but firmly against my shoulder. "Do not breathe quickly. Do not let your fear make noise." I remembered how badly I had wanted to run in that moment, every instinct in my small body screaming at me to flee as fast as my legs could carry me. But my mother's grip remained steady, her breathing slow and controlled, and somehow that steadiness reached through my fear and settled inside me as well. "Fear wants you to be loud," she had told me quietly, her eyes fixed calmly on the shifting haze ahead of us. "It wants you to run, to shout, to make yourself as visible as possible, because fear believes that visibility means safety. But out here, visibility means exactly the opposite." The creature had passed within a few short meters of us that day, close enough that I could hear its heavy breathing through the thick pollen haze, close enough that a single careless movement or sound would likely have ended both our lives instantly. But we had remained still, quiet, and controlled, exactly as my mother had taught me, and eventually the danger moved on, unaware it had ever come so close to us at all. "Survival," my mother had said afterward, once the danger had fully passed, "is not about being the strongest thing in the world. It is about understanding exactly when strength is useful, and when stillness is the only thing that will keep you alive." I had carried that lesson with me every single day since then, through countless storms and countless close encounters with creatures far larger and far more dangerous than anything this comfortable academy could ever hope to simulate. It was not magic that had allowed me to disappear inside Threll's simulated haze earlier. It was simply years of hard, necessary practice, built entirely from a childhood spent learning exactly how easily fear could become a weakness, if you allowed it to make you loud when silence was what truly kept you alive. The chamber's mist finished clearing completely now, the holographic trees fading gently into nothing as the simulation reached its natural conclusion. The heavy doors along the chamber's edge slid open slowly, revealing the crowded viewing gallery beyond, filled with students and staff who had watched the entire strange, confusing trial unfold in stunned silence. Threll stood beside me, his earlier arrogance replaced now by something quieter, something far more thoughtful than I had seen from him during any of our previous encounters. "I do not understand," he said slowly, as we both stepped forward toward the open doorway. "The chamber sensors are supposed to track everything inside. I have seen this simulation used dozens of times before. Nothing has ever managed to avoid detection the way you just did. The sensors were built to track someone who has never needed to hide from real danger," I explained calmly. "They measure heat, movement, sound, all the things a comfortable life teaches you to stop paying attention to. My life taught me the opposite. I learned to control every single one of those things because ignoring them, even once, could have cost me everything." Threll considered this quietly as we walked together through the open doorway into the crowded gallery beyond. The students who had gathered to watch our trial fell into an uneasy, uncertain silence as we emerged, clearly unsure what to make of everything they had just witnessed. Grace pushed forward through the crowd immediately, relief clear on her face as she reached my side. "Are you all right?" she asked quickly. We could not see anything properly for almost the entire trial. No one knew what was happening in there. "I am fine," I told her honestly. Better than fine, actually. Instructor Calloran approached slowly, all four eyes fixed on me with an expression I had not seen from any Academy staff member since my arrival, something closer to genuine curiosity than simple polite tolerance. "Kira," the instructor said carefully, "what exactly did you do in there? Our sensor logs show almost nothing useful for nearly the entire duration of the trial." I considered my answer carefully before speaking. "I did what my planet taught me to do," I said simply. "I made myself difficult to find, that is all." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, students whispering rapidly to one another, clearly reevaluating everything they thought they understood about me and about the world I came from. Threll remained quiet beside me, his silver skin still slightly pale from the experience, his usual confident posture noticeably absent. Several students glanced his way, clearly waiting to see how he would respond now that his carefully planned demonstration had turned so completely against its original purpose. "I believe this trial would prove something," Threll finally said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent gallery. "I thought it would show everyone that all this talk about Deathworld toughness was simply exaggeration, something built on fear of the unfamiliar rather than genuine skill." He paused, glancing at me directly, something uncertain flickering behind his eyes. "Instead," he continued slowly, "it showed me something I did not expect at all." The crowd remained silent, waiting. "It showed me," Threll said, "that everything I assumed about her world was built entirely on my own comfort, rather than any real understanding. I have never once had to disappear to survive anything. I have never once had to control my own breathing simply to stay alive. I mocked something I never actually understood, and I did it because it was easy, not because it was true." I watched him carefully as he spoke, searching for any sign that this admission was simply another performance, another clever trick meant to win back the crowd's favor. But his voice carried none of his usual polished confidence now, only something quieter, something that sounded, for the first time since I had met him, genuinely honest. "I still do not fully understand how you did what you did in there," he admitted, turning to face me directly. "But I understand now that I was wrong to mock something I never bothered to actually learn about." The gathered crowd remained quiet for a long moment, clearly processing this unexpected shift from the boy who had spent days openly mocking my planet in front of everyone. I looked at him steadily, feeling none of the satisfaction I might have expected from this moment. Instead, I felt only calm, patient understanding, the same feeling I always carried whenever someone finally began to grasp something they had previously refused to consider. "You asked a question back in the amphitheater," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly across the silent gallery. "You wanted to know if a Deathworld really makes someone tougher than a gentle world like yours. I think you already have your answer now." Threll nodded slowly, something like genuine respect settling into his expression for the very first time. "I do," he said, "and I think I owe you something more than just an admission in front of everyone." I said nothing immediately, waiting to see what he meant. "I would like to actually understand," he continued, his voice steady now, despite the obvious effort it took him to say the words. "Not as a joke, and not as another attempt to prove some point in front of an audience. I would genuinely like to understand what your world is actually like, if you are willing to explain it to someone who clearly misjudged everything about it." The crowd around us shifted slightly, clearly surprised by this sudden, unexpected turn from the boy who had never once shown genuine curiosity about anyone or anything beyond his own comfortable existence. I studied him carefully for a long moment, weighing his words against everything I had seen from him over the past several days. Genuine change rarely announced itself so quickly, and I had learned long ago never to trust words alone, especially from someone who had spent so much time using clever words as weapons. But there was something different in his expression now, something quieter and more thoughtful than anything I had seen from him before. "We will see," I said finally, my voice calm and even. "Actions matter more than words, Threll. That is another lesson my world taught me a long time ago." He nodded slowly, accepting this without argument, and for the first time since my arrival at this academy, the silence between us carried something other than mockery or tension. It carried, instead, the quiet, uncertain beginning of something neither of us had expected at all. Word of what happened inside that chamber spread far faster than I ever expected. By the following morning, recordings from the viewing gallery had already reached far beyond the academy itself, shared across countless networks throughout the wider coalition. Somewhere out there, someone had captured Threll's voice cracking as he called out my name into empty mist, followed by the stunned silence of an entire crowd realizing I had been standing directly behind him the whole time. I did not seek out the attention. I simply woke up to find it had already arrived, uninvited, exactly as it always seems to when something unexpected happens in front of enough witnesses. Grace found me in the dining hall that morning, practically breathless with excitement, as she slid into the seat across from me, her datapad already glowing with dozens of open messages and video links. "Kira, you need to see this," she said, turning the screen toward me. "It is everywhere, every academic network, dozens of independent channels, even some official coalition boards. Everyone is talking about what happened yesterday." I glanced briefly at the screen, watching a clip of Threll spinning through the thinning haze, his composure completely gone, his voice raw with genuine uncertainty. Beneath the video, countless comments scrolled past, filled with surprise, admiration, and no small amount of embarrassment directed squarely at him. "This is not exactly what I intended," I admitted quietly, setting the datapad gently back down. "Maybe not," Grace said, "but it is exactly what needed to happen. People have spent years dismissing Deathworlds as failures, as places barely worth mentioning. This is the first time most of them have actually seen what surviving one really looks like." Throughout that day, the attention only grew. Students who had barely spoken to me before suddenly found reasons to strike up conversations in hallways and shared classrooms, asking careful, genuinely curious questions about Kesserine 4 rather than the mocking comments I had grown used to since my arrival. Even Instructor Calloran approached me privately after our afternoon lesson, all four eyes fixed on me with quiet, thoughtful interest. "The Academy has received several inquiries already," the instructor said carefully. "Diplomatic offices, academic researchers, even a few representatives from planetary survey divisions. They are all asking the same question. How exactly did your physiology allow you to avoid detection so completely inside that chamber?" "It was not physiology alone," I explained patiently. "It was training, years of practice, built from genuine necessity. My body simply learned to do what my life required of it." Instructor Calloran considered this for a long moment. "There has not been a request like this in quite some time," the instructor finally said. "Several research teams are interested in understanding more about Kesserine 4 itself and about the adaptations your people have developed there. If you are willing, this could open significant opportunities, both for yourself and for your homeworld." I thought of my planet then, of the small, struggling settlements scattered across its unforgiving surface, of families who had spent generations surviving conditions the rest of the galaxy had long ago dismissed as simply too dangerous to bother understanding. If genuine interest and respect could finally begin replacing casual dismissal, that alone would already be worth everything that had happened inside that chamber. "I would be willing to speak with them," I said honestly, "if it helps people understand my world properly, rather than simply fearing or mocking it." Over the following days, the situation continued shifting in ways I had not fully anticipated. Representatives from several Deathworld colonies, scattered across different regions of Coalition space, began reaching out as well, some through official channels, others through simple, personal messages sent directly to me once my name became more widely known. One message, from a young man named Daniel Rourke, living on a distant world classified with a similarly harsh registry rating, stayed with me particularly clearly. "I have spent my entire life feeling like my homeworld was something to apologize for," he wrote. "Watching what happened to you, and hearing how you explained your world afterward, made me feel proud of where I come from, for the first time in longer than I can properly remember. Thank you for that." I read his words several times, feeling something warm settle quietly inside my chest. This had never been about proving Threll wrong, not truly. It had always been about something larger, something that mattered far beyond a single classroom argument or a single simulation trial. Threll himself changed more gradually than I initially expected, though the change itself seemed genuine rather than performed for an audience. He began attending several optional sessions the Academy arranged once official interest in Kesserine 4 grew strong enough to warrant a proper cultural exchange program, listening carefully as I explained details about my homeworld that most students had never previously bothered asking about. During one such session, held in a smaller, quieter classroom than our usual gatherings, Threll raised his hand carefully, his earlier arrogance still noticeably absent from his tone. "You mentioned once that your people learned to disappear before they learned to read," he said. "I have been thinking about that a great deal since the trial. What exactly does that kind of childhood actually look like?" I considered the question carefully before answering, aware that several other students in the room were listening closely as well. "It looks like learning patience before you learn almost anything else," I explained. "It looks like understanding that the world around you does not care whether you are ready for it or not. Every child on Kesserine 4 learns very early that survival depends far more on awareness and control than on simple physical strength alone." "That sounds exhausting," another student commented quietly. "It can be," I admitted honestly, "but it also builds something valuable. A kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you are capable of, rather than simply hoping you might be capable enough if the moment ever actually arrives." Threll listened carefully throughout the entire session, occasionally asking careful, thoughtful questions, rather than the mocking comments he had once offered so freely. Something about the entire experience seemed to have genuinely shifted his perspective, not simply toward my own homeworld specifically, but toward the wider assumption that comfort and safety automatically made a person superior to those who had survived far harsher conditions. Several weeks after the trial, the Academy received official notice from the Coalition Registry Office regarding an updated classification review for Kesserine 4. Instructor Kaloran called me into a private meeting to share the news personally, clearly aware of how significant this update actually was. "The registry has reviewed the recent data collected regarding your homeworld's adaptive capabilities," the instructor explained. "Given everything demonstrated during your trial, along with additional information gathered through subsequent research inquiries, they have decided to update Kesserine 4's official classification." I felt my breath catch slightly, uncertain what to expect. What does that mean exactly? "It will no longer carry the simple designation of Deathworld," Instructor Kaloran said. "Instead, the registry has created an entirely new classification, specifically for worlds like yours. They are calling it a Cradle World designation, meaning a planet whose harsh conditions have produced genuinely remarkable adaptive capabilities within its native population, rather than simply representing a failed or dangerous environment unworthy of further study." I sat quietly for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what this actually meant. My planet would no longer be dismissed as barely worth mentioning on official star charts. It would instead carry a designation that acknowledged, clearly and officially, exactly what my people had accomplished simply by surviving there, generation after generation, without ever giving up. "There is more," Instructor Kaloran added gently. The official designation includes a specific phrase, now attached permanently to Kesserine 4's registry file, "Do not underestimate." I could not help the small, quiet smile that formed at those words. It felt, in some strange and satisfying way, like an official acknowledgement of exactly the warning I had given Threll on that very first day, one he had chosen to laugh off entirely rather than take seriously. News of the reclassification spread almost as quickly as the original trial recordings had, sparking renewed interest and discussion throughout numerous academic and diplomatic circles across the coalition. Several other Deathworld colonies began reaching out to Academy officials, requesting similar reviews of their own registry classifications, hopeful that genuine understanding might finally begin replacing generations of careless dismissal. I found Threll waiting for me outside the instructor's office later that same day, his posture noticeably different from the confident, careless boy who had once mocked my planet in front of an entire classroom. "I heard about the reclassification," he said quietly. "Congratulations. That is well deserved." "Thank you," I said honestly. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I want you to know something," he said. "I still do not fully understand everything about your world, and I probably never will, not completely. But I understand now that I was wrong to assume comfort and safety automatically made me somehow superior to people who survived conditions I have never once had to face." I studied him carefully, searching once more for any hint of performance behind his words, but finding instead only quiet, genuine sincerity. "I told you once," I said finally, my voice calm and even, "that I only ever give one warning. You are fortunate, Threll, that the lesson you needed to learn only cost you a little embarrassment inside a simulation chamber rather than something far more permanent." He nodded slowly, clearly understanding exactly what I meant. "I am grateful for that," he admitted, "more grateful than I probably deserve to be." We stood together quietly for a moment longer, two people from vastly different worlds who had somehow found their way toward a small, unexpected understanding neither of us had anticipated when this entire situation first began. Later that evening, alone once more in my quarters, I sat beside the narrow viewport, watching the distant, artificial stars drift slowly past. My thoughts wandered back home, to the harsh, unforgiving landscape of Kesserine 4, to the families still struggling every single day against conditions the rest of the galaxy had spent generations dismissing entirely. For the first time since arriving at this academy, I felt something other than quiet, patient endurance settle within me. I felt something closer to hope, the genuine possibility that understanding, however slowly it arrived, might finally begin replacing careless mockery. My planet had never needed anyone's approval to remain exactly what it always was: strong, unforgiving, and quietly remarkable in ways most people would never fully understand. But if a single trial inside a simulation chamber could help even a few more people finally see that truth clearly, then everything that had happened, every warning given, and every consequence that followed had been entirely worth it. I only ever give one warning. This time, at last, someone had actually listened.